Alrighty. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first in a series of public streams for basically anybody to
Alrighty.
watch.
Hello, everybody, and
Oh my
welcome to
goodness,
the
I've
first
got
in a
some
series
desktop
of.
audio. Hang on. There we go. And let me just fix this. Do. Okay, there we go. Fixed my audio. Let's restart, shall we? So, welcome to the first in a series of public streams during which I'm going to be focusing on the character modeling side of creating characters for AAA video games. This is going to be focused exclusively on the modeling side, with nothing aside from UVs having to do with materials. I will briefly touch on, how UVs might affect materials, but I'm not going to be diving into any materials stuff during any point in this general workshop. The general structure of this workshop is pretty open, and I have each week planned out for general topics. And each of those weeks, I'm going to be doing two separate streams. The first of which will be very focused on a single aspect of the character modeling pipeline, and the second stream of which, each week, will be taking what I did the previous day and pushing it a little farther. Each of those streams is going to be public, or at least the first 2 hours of each of those streams will be public. And then for the third hour of this whole program, I'm going to be going into a private Google Hangout with people who signed up through Patreon, during which we'll discuss any number of different topics, mostly related to modeling, but I'll also touch on portfolio critiques and general modeling and texture critiques. That's sort of an open discussion format that's generally for group feedback, as well as getting specific answers to specific questions that you might have about the character pipeline at a AAA studio. I still have some slots open on Patreon for people who want to sign up for that. So if you're interested, just pop on over to my Patreon. It's the same. It's just XCK3D at Patreon, same as it is here on Twitch. And yeah, if you can't afford to do that, I will also be posting recordings of both the public streams and the private Google Hangouts. And there is an option to sign up to get those early, and for the people who actually sign up, they will have access to videos of the private hangouts, which I record along with the public streams. But if you don't sign up for anything, unfortunately, you'll only get access to the public portions of the streams. As far as when things will be posted, whether it's video on demand or on YouTube, I'm planning on having the public portions of all of the streams available to the general public about 2 days after they air. So the recording of this current stream right now will probably be going up on Thursday, and it's going to be going up right before the next public stream starts. So if you want to get stuff as soon as it's uploaded to YouTube, as soon as it's available, if you don't have the money to sign up for the program, or if you're just interested in having links to the, private playlists and stuff on YouTube, you might consider kicking a few bucks my way. If not, no biggie. There's still going to be the public portions of the stream available as long as YouTube exists, so you can just watch that stuff later on. So, what am I going to be talking about today? Today, and essentially for the rest of this course, but today especially, I'm going to be talking about fast retopology. Now, retopology is something that a lot of people, they consider it a pain in the ass, because honestly, it is. You take something that you've already made, and you go and you just make the same damn thing again. That's annoying. Nobody likes that. A lot of people find it a little bit overwhelming doing retopology, because not only are you making the same thing over again, but you're also having to optimize it as you go. So I'm going to be talking today about some very quick ways that you can lay down humanoid body topology I'm not going to be doing the head or hands for this guy today, or probably even the feet. That's going to be that's going to be coming up a little later in this series of videos, streams, whatever you want to call them. Mainly because heads and hands, and to a much lesser extent feet, present some unique modeling, rigging, and animation challenges. So it's important to focus on those things specifically. So next week I'm going to be talking about head topology, both facial topology as well as topology for other areas of the head. Different methods that you can use for retopologizing heads, whether they're more, monster-like, like this guy, or whether they're just generic normal people. During the course of talking about head and face topology, I'm also going to be talking a little bit, I'm going to be talking a little bit about using generic topology for multiple different head models. So this is something you'll see in a lot of AAA games with lots of side characters. They'll reproject the same topology onto different base models or scans. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about how you can do that, along with the types of topology that are appropriate for doing that. During the course of talking about facial topology, I'm also going to be talking about the facial action coding system, or FACS, which is essentially a system that is used to encode facial expressions from performance capture, which are then projected onto models for animation, whether it's talking or expressions or whatever. There are some specific considerations that you need to make in general facial topology when you're doing stuff with, very expressive characters, so that's something important to keep in mind. When I start talking about hands, I'm going to be talking about multiple different aspects of why it's important to get good topology for hands. But I'm also going to be talking about making sure that hands are the hand models that you make are both efficient and reusable between multiple characters, because, once again, in large titles with many, many different characters, you'll see lots of reuse of things like hands and heads and feet and things that can either be deformed to fit an existing head, or things that can be just copied and pasted from one character to the next. So I'm going to be talking about different ways that you can lay out topology for hands so that they deform well and they can be copied and pasted. Finally, in the last week of this general workshop, I'm going to be talking about two main topics, the biggest of which, though, is UVs and laying out UVs for characters, and how UVs will influence how you model something, where you put seams, where you put different types of topology. And then from there, I'm going to be getting into a couple of other, smaller topics that generally have to do with things like clothes, hard surface modeling, specifically for characters, and stuff along those lines. The smaller pieces that still present problems when you're doing a variety of different characters. So, for the majority of what I'm going to be talking about over the course of this next 4 weeks, I'm going to be using this guy as a base. I'm going to be retopologizing him. I'm going to be doing his entire body, including his teeth, his claws, his eyes. I'm also going to be putting some hair cards on him over the course of this. I'm going to probably be touching on hair cards at a few different points over the course of this. Talking about where it's good to place them, how you can lay them out, general concepts that go along with hair cards, and I'll probably be finishing off the hair cards during the last week of this entire workshop. So, without further ado, let's talk about quick humanoid retopology. Oh, excuse me. I think I might be catching a little bit of a summer cold. Regardless. So, fast humanoid retopology. What do I mean by this? Well, retopology, as I mentioned before, presents some problems, namely that you are remaking the thing that you've already made before. But there are some ways that you can speed up the process by either reusing things from your high poly or by laying things out in a very predictable manner that you can reuse across multiple different types of models, multiple different types of humanoid models. And a lot of these concepts will carry over to things that maybe have multiple arms, or potentially have things like multiple heads or different numbers of fingers. And essentially, what it is, what this entire concept is making sure that you know what the general shape of the entire model is, what different parts of it are, and how they can be represented in the simplest possible way. So let's do that. Let's represent this guy in the simplest possible way. And actually, let's just draw on a quick screenshot, because that will help to illustrate what I'm talking about. Let's just take a quick screenshot of this guy and go over to Photoshop, and then just draw over the top of this real quick, and then we'll start laying out some topology. So what is this guy essentially? He is essentially a person. He just has a few extra joints, a weird head, and a tail. So if we just start drawing a vaguely humanoid shape over this, we can start to see what types of shapes he's made of. You got 2 legs, got 2 arms, you've got a torso, you got the neck, there's that other arm. Okay, so this is great. Alright, now that we have the basic general shape of this guy, we need to do some things. We need to make some considerations. The first of which is looking at things like his joints. His joints are essentially spots on cylinders. They're just little cylindrical bits, or little cylindrical cross sections, which have been slightly deformed. So as we start drawing these lines along here, you can see that we're just cutting him up into cylinders, and things start to look a lot more manageable once he is broken down into cylinders. Once he's broken down into cylinders, we can see that there are some ways that we can very quickly start creating topology that will represent the very roughest shapes of what we're looking at here. So let's start doing the exact same thing in 3D. Let's just go over here to the Topology tab, and there are going to be ways that you can use this exact same workflow in any sort of 3D program out there that supports essentially snapping things onto the surface of another object. So as long as you can do retopology in it, you can do the exact same stuff that I'm doing here. You don't have to use Modo. You could use Maya, Max, you could use TopoGun, Blender, even 3D Coat. To a lesser extent, you can do it in ZBrush, although a big part of the way that I work involves using Ngons and triangles, which are not super friendly for ZBrush. But regardless, let's start laying some stuff out very quickly and simply. I'm going to turn on symmetry real quick. And let's just get a base going for this guy. Let's get the most absolutely basic simple shapes going. We're going to do some 4-sided cylinders. Oops. For his legs and for his arms. And we're going to be able to connect these cylinders in the same way that these things are connected. So we're going to be able to have a central shape for his body, and these cylinders for his arms are going to be able to connect to the top. The cylinders for his legs are going to be able to connect to the bottom. So here we go. We've got 2 4-sided cylinders that just give you the most basic shapes for his legs, his thighs. We can do the same by extending outward, down his legs. And the way that I am laying out the edges, say like this central edge along the front is very deliberate. I'm laying this along the very front middle of his thigh and his shin so that there will always be an edge loop right along there. I'm also putting edge loops at the joints. So there's this loop up here, and then there's this loop down here right along his knee. These are areas where I'm going to start concentrating detail as I move farther into the retopology process. Now, this is stuff that's pretty basic and everybody generally knows about, laying out polygons and stuff like this. So I'm just going to do it really quickly again with his arms, and then I'm going to start connecting them together in his torso. Let's just do that real quick. Let's just do his arms. Boop, boop. Let's put this right down the middle just so that we have the start of a nice loop going all the way up. And another one right down the middle of the back of his arm, right on his elbow. Let's see, right on the peak of his elbow, right there. And then he's got one in the little dip, his interior elbow. Now, the placement that I've got for the inside here of this loop is also important because what that's going to allow me to do later on is think about UV seams and where I can hide them very effectively. Having a loop right here along the middle of his arm going down to his wrist is going to allow me to put a UV seam along there, and that will make things a lot easier when it comes time to start texturing him, because if there is any sort of visible seam, it will be hidden most of the time when he's either running on all fours or walking with his hands sort of to his sides. You're not going to be seeing the interior of his arm, you're just going to be seeing most of the exterior. So the exterior of his arm is going to be in the middle of a UV island. Alright, let's get this done real quick. Weld these up. Okay, so I'm not going to jump into his hands because hands are kind of a big topic, and that's why I'm saving them, why I'm saving hands for a little later on. But now I'm going to do a couple different things. First, I'm going to completely ignore his tail for now, because the tail is... I will add his tail later on, but the most important thing right now is getting his arms and legs connected with each other. Now, you'll notice with this loop down the center of the interior of his arm, and this loop going down the outside of his leg, they actually line up. So what I can do is I can just, directly connect these. Like so. Okay. So now that I have a direct connection between the arms and legs, if I select a loop, it'll select that entire area from his ankle all the way up to his wrist. Also, if I come across like this and start joining these polygons at the center, let me just center that, and then do the same thing along his back, just ignoring his tail for now. We'll just put this one up there in a nice spot. Joining things like this, now that I have polygons going across all the way around his belly, I can select that as a loop. And if I can select that as a loop, that means I can start adding more and more edge loops in there to add more and more detail. I'm going to do the same thing down here, right in his crotch. Connect this right here, and connect his butt. Let's just put that in there. And then I can close this off down here. Now, if I subdivide this with with the setting turned on so that polygons snap to the surface of the background mesh, you see that it immediately adds edge loops in places where they're sticking to the right place. There are some weird edge cases where it's not working 100% perfectly just because the distance between the original model and the background mesh is pretty far. but I can account for that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some loops in place so that he can have a neck and so that he can have some shoulder loops going over his shoulders and connecting with his chest. Like so. I'm going to do the same thing across his chest. Connect that. All right. So now I have the most basic topology for this guy that you can imagine. This is like maybe 1997 spec PS1 or N64 game topology. But this is good. This provides a nice solid base for me, and because I now have all these connected loops, what I can start doing is adding more and more support loops, which are going to then push the shape of this guy farther and farther along. And now that I have a good base, I'm actually going to do something real quick. I'm going to cut a hole right here. I'm going to make a tail for him. Let's just extend this outward. And looks like symmetry is not behaving, so we're just going to turn that off. Delete this entire side. Oops. And then we can mirror it later. So let's give him that tail. Let's extend this outward. So aside from adding basic forms in the right places, working with four-sided cylinders also does something pretty cool for me. What it does is it creates a mesh, especially once it's subdivided, that has, say, 8, 16, 32, 64-sided cylinders for each of his limbs. In addition, you also get the same number around his chest. So these 4 polygons, you can see that it's 4 polygons right there. These 4 polygons, when I subdivide it, that loop is now made of 8 polygons. 16, 32, 64. And what that's going to do for me is it's going to provide a very nice base that I can then easily rip detail out of if I'm going to use this as the base mesh for both the high poly and the low poly. So this base mesh that I'm creating right now is actually going to be appropriate for a high poly mesh and a final low res game mesh. So let's add a couple more cuts in here just to shape this a little better. Oops. Center those. There we go. Something else that's cool is that when I'm at this very, very low detail stage, if I add even a single edge loop in an area like right here, around the tail, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to duplicate. Here, let's call this low. We'll call this one high. Let's make an instance of this. And then just, oops, here we go. And resize it so that we get a nice mirrored version across the other side so we can just see things pretty nicely. Okay, there we go. Now I can see along there. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to start adding loops that will allow me to build up the shapes for this guy a little bit more accurately. So I just added a loop around his stomach, and I'm going to adjust the placement of some of these so that they follow contours a little better. So you'll notice that he's got these very strong muscle details in here. I'm going to make sure that this point right here is at the point that's farthest out. It sticks out really far. And then this here is going to provide a nice smooth curve along here once it's subdivided. So if I do this, you can see that it follows a curve very nicely. So let's start adding detail in other areas. I'm going to add some detail in the arms to make it easier for the subdivision operation to catch some of the outer detail that's kind of far away. So let's do that right now. Let's just add this. We're going to put this in the farthest location from the center, just so that when I subdivide again, it catches all that nice curvature. And adding another loop in this area is, like I said before with the tail, going to give some nice edge loops around that elbow, which are going to be great for deformation. So let's move this and add another edge loop right here. Actually, let's move this up and move this so that it follows the curvature of the bicep, so that we get some nice support loops going along the bicep once it's subdivided. So you can see what happens. It gives that nice curvature. That's something that's really good. That's something I really want. Alright, and then we're going to add some more loops up to his upper arm to catch the triceps and more of the bicep, along with this big divot right there under the deltoid. So let's just add a loop. Let's see here. So we're going to catch, now with this one, we're going to catch that divot right there at the end of the deltoid. And this, we're actually going to push up a little farther so it catches some of that shape once it's subdivided. You can see that as I subdivide it, it's going right inside that little divot. This we're going to put right here, and this one we're going to put right at the outermost point of the tricep, right along here. So, like I said before, I'm gradually building up shapes and getting the biggest shapes out there. So let's just go pretty quick and get some more big shapes in, and then we can start talking about using differently shaped polygons to sort of accentuate some details. So I'm just going to start adding loops willy-nilly now that I've sort of explained this process. Add loops to places where it's going to need the most detail, and then from there I'm going to start talking about defining shapes like maybe right along here where you have this nice muscle insertion for the muscles on his butt, and the maybe some of the muscles on the fronts of his legs, around his knee, that type of thing. Let's just get that started real quick. All right, let's just add a bunch of loops. I'll just put them right at about halfway point and then move them to where we need them. Okay, so I want these at the farthest points from the center. Here we go. That. And then push that down. Okay. Let's push this down. Let's make sure that these are following the contours of his muscles. And make sure that they hit both the innermost and outermost points. Alright. This one needs to move to the lat right there. Okay. This one's going to come around the front a little bit, get more of that form. This one's going to go back there to support the lats. Let's go here. This is going to get pushed up into that little dimple. Okay. All right, so now we can start to see his silhouette taking shape. We're in a pretty good place. This is a nice solid base to start from. But you'll notice that from certain angles, you don't get as much volume as from, say, the front or back, or side to side. There are some areas of volume loss, especially like here on the front sides of the thigh. These bulging muscles are right in the middle of the flat plane of, say, these polygons. So what can we do to fix that? Same thing that we've been doing before. Adding more loops gradually and making sure that they're placed in such a way that those loops support the overall shape of what we're trying to make. So let's put this right around here. And then, now as I mentioned before, this is one continuous loop, and what this means is that if I want to fill out some of the volume on his arm, in say this area right here on his forearm, here on the lower part of his bicep, and down here on the leg, I can do that all at once by just adding another loop, sticking it right in the middle, and then adjusting as I see fit. I'm going to do the same thing basically everywhere else after I've adjusted the placement of these points. So we can do that across here and here. Let's just add some more loops. All right, cool. Let's adjust these so that we have more volume. Right along here. Let's push this down so it gets some support loops around his buttocks. And this is looking a lot better. Let's make sure that the placement isn't janky on places like the backs of his arms where there's a lot of volume. Up here. All right. So that is a nice 8-sided cylinder, which is going to subdivide very nicely, and it'll be very easy to optimize later on. We're going to do a couple more loops just to make sure that we're catching everything. Through here. So this right here, oops, this right here is going to be his neck hole. This is where you're going to attach his head. And once again, if it's 8-sided, that means it's going to be very easy to instantly cut the number of polygons in half by just selecting a loop and removing it. So that's very handy for high detail models that say you're exporting from ZBrush. Okay, let's add one more loop right here. That's good. And now, let's just change this from an instance to a mesh, and then we'll just combine these. Okay, so there's a nice, very basic model that can be used to get the general forms of a humanoid body. Now, there are still some areas, like here along his back, where I'm sort of losing volume, but everything in general is there. So let's just, let's see here, let's just, oopsie daisy, weld this seam together, subdivide it on him, and pick up some of those higher res details. So let's just, oops. Weld this together. Okay, so let's go back here, subdivide a couple times. Oh, and there we go. So you can see that with just a little bit of work, hardly any work, you start to get some really nice shapes from the very most basic topology that you could really think of. Just a few simple cylinders. His arms are cylinders, his legs are cylinders, his torso is essentially a cylinder, despite being very deformed, and well, I mean, it's already looking pretty usable. It's still kind of high poly in this case. Let me turn it down a little bit. But yeah, there we go. There's a 10,000 triangle mesh that could, with a little bit of cleanup, be ready to use. However, there are some problems with this mesh. This is a good start. This is an excellent start for a lot of areas, especially areas like around his elbows, where you get nice continuous loops that go around and follow the contours of the large shapes. There are nice loops, say, around the arm up there at the armpit. However, there are also some real problem areas, specifically areas like the attachment of the deltoid to the upper arm right here, where you get conflicting shapes. You have the roundness of the deltoid coming in and then giving you sort of weird sawtooth stuff in here that is very non-planar, probably wouldn't deform very well, and is also going to be difficult to texture because you know, polygons like this that are very highly non-planar are not going to bake textures very well. The normal maps are going to be a little bit weird because the triangulation is odd. If you don't export this as a triangulated model with all the triangles going in the right direction, you might end up with artifacts when you import that model and normal map into an engine, etc., etc., etc. So how can we sort of fix this? How can we go back and make something that's actually going to work better for areas like this deltoid insertion, or the area on the glutes back here where it inserts into the back of his thigh? You know, there are lots of areas like that where sometimes the model that is built from this very simple base, which is a good base for many applications, there are some cases where it's just not going to work out the way that it should. In this case, you're going to start wanting to look into using things like Ngons. Now, there was a question in chat about what Ngons are. Ngons are polygons that have any number of sides. Technically, a triangle or a quad is an Ngon because in is just a representation, or it is a, it's basically saying n is a number, and it is a polygon with n number of sides. However, the common use of Ngons is for polygons that have more than 4 numbers of sides. We use quads and triangles so much that Ngons sort of have their own catch-all thing since they are not either a triangle or a quad. Now, using Ngons is often frowned upon by lots of people, and the reason for that is actually not a great one. The original reasoning for not using Ngons in models was that they would either not render correctly or not subdivide correctly using software from, say, the late 90s or early 2000s. This is no longer the case. If the Ngon is the solution that you think is best, it's probably the best solution. Now, a lot of people, a lot of instructors will tell you don't use Ngons without giving you any sort of explanation. The explanation for not using Ngons is simply that, for example, 3D Studio Max in much earlier versions simply didn't support them, or would crash if you used them, or any number of other things. That era is past. unless you're using ZBrush, in which case, well, ZBrush is weird and ZBrush doesn't like Ngons, but ZBrush is also stupid. I love ZBrush, but it's kind of stupid. The fact that it doesn't support Ngons is kind of backward. Regardless, we're going to use some Ngons here, and the thing that we're going to get out of using Ngons is actually not going to have Ngons, and it will be perfectly usable in ZBrush or anything that doesn't support Ngons. Let me just add one more loop right here. And let me see here. Where am I missing? Oh, I'm also missing one right here. There we go. There, nice 8-sided cylinders everywhere. Perfect. Okay, so let's talk about how to use Ngons and triangles to support the shapes of, say, your high poly sculpt. And let's use some triangles and Ngons right in here in this area where we need some better support for this deltoid shape. First, let's move this out of the way so that we can get a nice loop going along the shoulder. This, by moving these polygons up onto the shoulder, what that's going to do is, when you subdivide it, it's going to push the edge loop up farther. It's going to make it easier to deform that shoulder up there, up top. So we're just going to move these, and once it's subdivided, it'll start to look a little better up there. Let's move this into here. Do. Got some really non-planar stuff going up here, but that's okay. Alright, now, let's just start cutting into our model, subdividing it, and see what happens. So let's just use the cut tool. Let's cut from here right through that quad and follow the curvature of the deltoid. Let's make sure that that snaps to the surface of the high poly. And you know what? Let's just add another cut along here. Move that down. Yeah, let's add some cuts in here just so that things follow the surface of the model that we're trying to retopologize. Let's throw caution to the wind. You know what? Let's get rid of that. Let's make this right here a big old Ngon. It's got 5 sides now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, and here we've got 2 triangles. Let's move that up into that little divot in there. We've got another big old Ngon right here. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sides. Let's see what happens when we subdivide this. Alright, okay. So, this is kind of ugly. This is not perfect, but it illustrates something important. When you're using Ngons in your high poly, or the base for your high poly, and you subdivide it, in Modo you just press the D key. In other programs there's all kinds of ways to do it. You could use Turbo Smooth or whatever. It's going to make a bunch of quads. All those triangles and Ngons that were all up in here, they just turned into quads when I subdivided, because the subdivision algorithm knows how to turn all that stuff into quads, and it just mathematically does it all the time. So this is still kind of ugly. There's this big group of 6 edges right here that's not really going to deform well or anything like that, but we're starting to get a good base for the shape, and it has nice continuous edge loops. They're not perfect edge loops, and it's kind of a spiral right now, but we have some support along here where there simply wasn't support before. We've got a question in chat that says, so would you do this if you were doing the final mesh for the game? And the answer is yes. Yes, I would absolutely do this, and I do this almost every day that I'm doing retopology at work. I very heavily use triangles and Ngons when I'm doing retopology because they subdivide so cleanly. They will always subdivide into quads, And quads are very easy to work with when you're rigging, because a lot of tools will look at the different options that they have for smoothing weights and stuff like that along edges. And if there are 4 edges, it'll know what to do a lot more easily. So yes, stuff like this ends up being pretty usable for an in-game mesh. So let's just start putting some cuts along this deltoid, some support loops and stuff, and just see what happens. Let's just start cutting into this sucker. Let's just do this. Put some cuts through here, and these triangles right here weren't subdividing so well, so we can just join them like that. And that's one vertex, okay, and that's, make sure that this is right on the surface of the mesh. So now that we're cutting into things, you know what, let's do this. We'll make sure that there aren't those triangles like that there were on the front. And this probably isn't going to work very well right here, but we can test it out. And we can make sure that every little bit of this supports the shape. So right now we've actually essentially just added an additional edge loop. And you know what? This is sort of coming down along here weirdly, so I'm going to cut across here. And look, I'm just making another quad. There's another quad right there. And what these different polygons along here are doing is supporting the shape of the deltoid. Now there are imperfect little bits here, like right here there is a 6-sided pole where you've got a bunch of polygons coming together. That's never going to subdivide very well. It's always going to be a little bit ugly. So we can do other stuff to sort of counteract how many polygons are getting merged together there. But we'll not worry about that for now. We're mostly concerned about getting the shape of this deltoid. So let's get the shape of that deltoid just down. So let's subdivide this and see what happens. Okay, this is a pretty good start. We have a loop that goes along the shape of the deltoid, and it's in a place where since the arm will be lifting up and down and moving forward and backward, that's actually a pretty decent support loop. However, there are some problems. The area in here is a lot more dense than the area up here. So we need to make sure that before subdividing, things are a lot more even. So let's we've got this big Ngon right here and this triangle right here. We saw that the 2 triangles together weren't subdividing super well, so maybe we'll make it so that this is a quad right here. Oops. Let's cut like this and cut like this. Get rid of that. Let's see how that subdivides. Let's make sure this is on the surface. Okay, that's pretty good. Just like before, it has a continuous flow going around the deltoid, and it just kind of feeds into where the neck is. That's pretty cool. But it does loop around on the front. So let's continue that loop. Let's continue the loop up into the neck, or alternately, we can continue the loop across the chest, like this. And we can, say, add another loop along the top of the shoulder, which is going to go in one of 2 directions. One, we could just have it loop around the back of the neck, or we could have it go down the back. Let's have it just kind of loop around. So what happens right now is, now that we have some more detail on his back, we can actually add some more curvature. And if we wanted to add things later on, like spiky hair or something along his back, having more detail, like the stuff right here, is going to support that. Let's see how that does. All right. So we've got a nice continuous loop that goes along his back and up onto his neck. But it's giving us some problems. And this is something that you'll run into a lot if you're using this cut and subdivision method that I'm using right now. You'll occasionally run into situations where a loop that looks pretty okay in most areas suddenly takes a turn in another direction. And this is where using the different subdivision levels sort of starts to get more complicated, because there's not really too much that we can do about the direction of that unless we want to start removing edges and redirecting things. So here's that loop, the one that sort of spirals around. Well, one thing we can do is start removing edges and start like cutting in and make this a, I don't know, some sort of continuous loop of some sort. See, like if I have this right here, this is going to continue like that. But at this low of a level of subdivision, that starts to get a little noodly and weird, and it gets to be a little bit hard to predict how things are going to react once you subdivide it again. And you're going to want to subdivide it again at some point and then lock in that subdivision, because one of the things that happens with areas like that loop or this loop is that things just start to behave very erratically when you're at higher or lower subdivision levels, depending upon where you started working. So we essentially want our loops to be very clean. We want things to be really clean and easy to work with at multiple subdivision levels, but especially at higher subdivision levels, which is going to be much more representative of what is going to be going in the game anyway. You're never going to put a model that looks like this into a game unless you intentionally want it to look bad. You're probably going to want something closer to this, or this, or even this, depending upon whether it's a close-up or not. So this very low subdivision level right here is mainly used to get the largest forms in place, like say this loop, this loop around the elbow, and then you'll subdivide and just start working on this one next. So that's what we're going to do now. Now that we have a general idea for the type of shape that we want to get for this deltoid, we're going to just fix a couple of things. We're going to cut across here and make it so that this is a quad. We're going to make it so that this is one continuous loop. And let's cut across here so that it just connects to the middle of the back, goes around and connects up here, or even better, connects across the chest so that we get a nice continuous edge loop coming across like that. Now, when I subdivide, here's what I get. I get a continuous loop going, well, this mesh isn't mirrored. Let me just fix that real quick. Let's just make sure that this is nice and mirrored, just so that it's easier to demonstrate with and easier to see for you folks watching the stream. Let's just get rid of all the non-symmetrical stuff. Oops. Where else are we connected? We are connected right there in his butt. There we go. That's better. Okay. Let's just make sure that we can mirror this really easily so that when it subdivides, it's completely symmetrical. We'll just do this real quick, center it, and mirror. Oops. Okay. Alrighty, here we go. So there's our continuous loop. Our continuous loop goes around his back, around his deltoid, and then across his chest. Sweet. But, as I said before, there's still going to be problems. And we can fix some of those problems, but those problems generally require us to be comfortable with working in higher or lower subdivision levels. In this case, we do have some pretty good layout. We've got, got this loop going around like that. And then kind of spiraling under his arm. It's a pretty decent shape, but it still is going to require some adjustment. So actually, let's see here. This actually goes all the way around his arm, and then this one, yep, that one presents some problems because what it does is it loops around like this, and then terminates in there. Oh my. So those are areas where, now that we've switched to a higher subdivision level, we can start to take care of them, smooth out those transitions and all those weird areas, and start to get things a little closer to the even geometry that we have, say, around the elbow here. Now you'll notice that around the elbow, things are actually looking pretty good. I can adjust and tweak some things, like the placement of some of these looks a little bit erratic, but in general, it looks pretty okay. It's mainly the areas around large insets, like this deltoid, where you start to run into problems. There's also problems in the underarm right here, where you get that same issue, where it transitions into the pectoral muscle. So those are things where, once again, switching to a higher subdivision level, we get more geometry to play with, and we can start to make more interesting geometry that's going to fix things like this spot right here. So instead of having that, we might have some edges that go across to sort of support the convex and concave shapes in there. There's a question in the chat, which is, isn't the reason it's going down his back because the loop hasn't been mirrored on the other side? Wouldn't using symmetry/mirror fix that issue? Yeah, I'm mainly not using symmetry right now because this model that was spat out of ZBrush is not 100% symmetrical. ZBrush has a tendency to do that on a very, very small level, even when you have symmetry turned on. Also, honestly, Moto's symmetry tools aren't 100% perfect, so sometimes you run into situations where things just simply end up being non-symmetrical, even though you had symmetry turned on. It's just a limitation of this specific tool, and it's not something you might necessarily run into using other tools. Regardless, let's fix some of the stuff now that we've started to get a little more happy with the shape of the shoulder. Mainly what we're going to fix are these areas in here, right here in the armpit, and this area back here. So what needs fixing in the armpit right here? Well, first of all, you have this loop going around, which is good. It's actually a nice layout for a loop. It goes all the way around his arm. But you do have this polygon right here, which connects this loop to this loop. Now that's not super desirable, and it's also mainly because, say, if you're trying to do weights and skinning on something like a shoulder, it's best to have loops that go all the way around the arm. So let me just hide this for a second. Let's just take a screenshot and start painting on that screenshot. We can just do it over the top of that one. So when you're skinning something in Maya or Max or whatever program of choice, oh, it looks like Photoshop has somehow shit the bed. That's cool. Come on, wake up, buddy. Well, okay. Well, we can do this another way with the contour tool. So this is just a quick little tool in Modo. But generally, when you're setting up skinning for a shoulder on basically any humanoid character, this is the type of arrangement that you'll want to see. Because what this allows you to do is raise the arm, lower the arm, have the arm go forward, have the arm go back, and do that all in a very predictable manner. Sort of like a bendy straw that you might put into a drink. This is the bendy part of the straw, and that allows you to go in multiple different directions. So having a loop that goes around like this is okay, but it's not perfect. It's not ideal. Ideally, what you'd have is the loop coming around the bottom here, but then continuing up. So we can do that. We can have that loop. It's just harder to do in the very low poly version. So that's why we've now switched to a higher poly version. And this is where we're going to continue doing more of our work to fix some of this topology, to make sure that we're supporting the shapes and supporting deformation later on. We've got another question in chat, which is, so is it best to have your loops go across the chest rather than going around the shoulder joint? It depends. In cases like this where you have a guy who has very, very exaggerated deltoids, it's good to have a loop going around the bottom of the deltoid that supports this shape. Mainly because, as I said before, you can get some weird artifacts where you have polygons that are going across what is essentially a gap and becoming very non-planar. Generally, for humanoid characters, unless they have extremely well-defined pectoral muscles and sort of a central chest area along the, along the middle of the chest, along the breastbone, you're really just going to need loops that go right across, just straight across. Those are easy to work with, and they deform pretty well. The only time that you're really going to need supporting geometry is for actually characters like this, where they're, here you can see the difference between the low and the high, where you have this sort of shape going on with the pectoral muscle. You'll want some support down here along the bottom of the pectoral muscle, just so that you don't get shading errors and you have enough geometry there to support that shape no matter what shape it goes into. Whether it's deforming because of a blend shape or because of bones, or rigging, or any number of other things. So let's start fixing some of the loops going around this shoulder. We're going to use the same process that we used for laying out the basic geometry of the very low detail version, but we're going to start getting a little bit more liberal with where we're placing cuts, because this is going to start being what is essentially our final low poly mesh. We have a nice base going on here with lots of detail. Depending upon how high poly you really want to get, you might subdivide one more time to get a result similar to this. And we may do that later on, but right now we're just going to focus on this subdivision level because it gives us a lot of geometry to play with, but it's also not so simple that we can't get the detail that we're looking for. So let's start fixing some things. First thing I'm going to fix is the way that the geometry curves around the pectoral muscle. So as you can see from a glancing angle, the pectoral muscle bulges out from where the low poly is, and we need to compensate for that. One problem is this polygon right here is in the middle of a big round area. Now we could do something like this, where we pull this geometry down to sort of support the shape from a glancing angle. However, you still have this polygon right here, which in the end is going to be highly non-planar. You can see that when I triangulate it, I can spin it around, and it's never going to completely conform to the shape the way that I want it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to delete that. And I'm going to delete his little friends who are right next to him. I'm going to have this follow the contour of the pectoral muscle. Oops. We're going to go along here. So you've got these two loops. I'm going to pull them so that they are a little closer together. And I'm going to start doing this. And that. All right. So already this is looking a little better. It's got a loop going around the bottom of the pectoral muscle. And that loop then transitions up into the shoulder. Now, we don't necessarily need it to transition up in the shoulder. That's just kind of a little happy accident. There are some other areas that are presenting problems. For example, these polygons up here, there's just simply not enough density in there to capture all of the shapes that we're looking for. You can see from a glancing angle, once again, just not enough detail. So let's just get rid of them and add some more detail in here. And actually, as we're adding more detail in there, we're also going to connect this loop so that instead of going around in this direction, it's going to go up. So let's just delete all this stuff, get rid of it, start from scratch in that area. And we'll delete that as well. So now we have, oops, oh, my tablet's freaking out. We have this loop going down below in his underarm, and we can sort of move stuff around so that it's a smoother, easier to work with curve. I'll just clean this up a little bit while we're at it. That's a little more regular and nice to look at, a little easier to work with. So let's have this loop, instead of going along the outside, go along the top. And what that's going to do is give us that bendy straw effect. It's going to make it easier to work with when you or the person that you're working with is trying to rig this sucker. And we're going to use the same method that we used before to add some geometry in here by having it be very low detail to just get the general shapes we want. And then later on, we'll add some more loops to it. So the good thing about deleting all those large polygons up here is that we opened up areas like this where we can start having connections between here and back here so that you can have a much tighter density going across like that. So let's do it. Let's start connecting things. Let's move things into slightly smoother shapes. Let's extend some edge loops out. This go down like that. Oops. Have this come down. Like this. Oopsie. Things like to connect into the background in Modo a little bit. That's okay. I'm going to move this so it's a little more regular shape. And now here is, once again, another happy accident slash happy thing that we almost sort of kind of planned for. We have this loop going along like this, and now we can connect the loop right above it back into the loop going across his back. All right. We can move this so that things are a little more even and go right into this crevice here between his shoulder muscles and his back muscles. And we can connect here. Oops. Here. And here. across here, connect there, there. So now, instead of having just 2 polygons up here, we're going to have at least 4. 1, 2, and then 1 going across here, and 1 going across here. That's twice the amount of detail by just rearranging things a very small amount. So let's connect this and that. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we'll add a couple of loops. 1, 2, connect them. And there we go. The shoulder now has a lot more detail. There's a lot more geometry that can deform when this guy is raising his arms above his head, moving his arms down or forward or back. It's pretty easy to rearrange things, add more loops, and add more detail. Let's count here. This is 4. Got 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's make this connection a little easier by moving this down. Like this, like this. 4. This is going to connect here, this to here, and this to here. Sweet. This is kind of an extraneous loop. It's not really going to go anywhere over here. It's not going to fit in, so we can just get rid of it. We can close this up. All right. Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Add a cut right across here. Doo-ba-doo-ba-doo. Here we go. So now, this is all quads that are laid out fairly evenly that will subdivide nicely and be easily sculptable in ZBrush. And you have a loop going across like here that if we just add, some cuts across his back, we can connect, and things start to look pretty solid all of a sudden. Let's see here. Once again, we have another question in chat. Is this going to be recorded for later viewing? Yes, it is. As I mentioned earlier, right at the beginning of the stream, I am recording all of these sessions, and I'm going to be posting the sessions, or posting the recordings of the sessions about 2 days after the streams air. And if you are one of the program members or you sign up specifically for the videos through Patreon, you'll get them as soon as they go up, and you'll have access to the videos of both the private chat sessions and these public videos. The public videos are going to be uploaded to YouTube, and I'll be posting the links to playlists on Twitter and other various social media places where I'm present. Additionally, I'm going to be making posts on Patreon with links to all this stuff. If you would like to sign up to view the playlists with the recorded private hangout sessions with people who signed up, that is an option. You don't actually have to sign up for the program. You can just sign up so that you have access to the recordings of the private sessions. Those private sessions are mostly Q&A with critiques, feedback, lots of group discussion, stuff along those lines. It's a pretty cool thing. I still have some slots open for the actual workshop setting. If you want to sign up for that, I believe I have 4 slots open currently. And that's going to max out at 8. So if that's something you're interested in, if you want to, chat with other people who are interested in learning about this stuff, if you want to, get feedback on something you're working on, or just do group discussion with other people who are interested in the same stuff, it's a pretty cool little environment. We meet in a Google Hangout after every streaming session, and it seems to work out pretty well. So yeah, I usually do a few demonstrations in that private Hangout, and we also do things like group critiques, and I'll often do paintovers of people's work. So yeah, if that sounds pretty cool, go ahead and sign up. If not, there's other options for, getting videos of those recorded sessions and other such things. I tend to answer lots of questions about not just the art aspects of, making characters, but also just, if you're not in the industry yet and you have questions about what goes into working in the industry, more than happy to answer questions like that. It's very loosey-goosey and sort of open to any sort of discussion that you're really into, though obviously this one will be focused mostly on the modeling aspect. One of the questions we got is, I signed up for the 275. I was wondering what comes with that, or if it's for a separate workshop from this. That is the one where we do a private hangout. I'd recommend checking your email. I sent out an email about an hour before the stream started with information on the private Google Hangout. And as soon as this stream is done, in about 40 minutes, I'm going to be hopping onto into the Google Hangout, and we can just talk for an hour or so, whatever people want to do. And we'll be talking mostly about modeling, along with the various aspects of what's going into this workshop, and we'll be talking about basically anything else that sort of interests you about the general topics of character modeling. I also do a lot of feedback, like I mentioned before. I'm happy to do paintovers and stuff like that, so yeah, if you have questions, bring them in there. I will also note that the Google Hangout that I use is a dedicated one, so if you signed up for the materials workshop that I did about a month ago, you will have access to that Google Hangout if you want to just come by and talk, or if you have questions about what I'm currently doing, what this current workshop entails, you're more than happy to drop by. It uses the same Google Hangout that we used for the materials workshop, and I'm sure that people in the modeling workshop would be happy to hear about your experiences, anything that you found useful during previous streams and that type of thing. So yeah, you're more than welcome to come by, talk, hang out, and just shoot the shit for a while. So while I've been babbling, I've been sort of making adjustments on the fly here, making the adjustments that I've sort of been talking about over the course of working on this guy. And essentially what I'm trying to do now is just make it so that this is something that, say, one of my rigging friends wouldn't scream at me about. So there are a few areas that are still kind of rough on this guy, but it's only been, an hour and a half or so where I've been working on this guy. So there's still a lot of refinement that I can do, and that's actually what I'm going to be doing over the course of the next stream as well. I'm going to be doing a lot more refinements, and I'm going to be talking about the process that I'm using for doing things like attaching hands or making feet, making sure that his head will attach pretty well. I'm going to be talking about, using continuous edge loops and such again. And I'm also going to be just generally refining this model. As a side note, at the end of this workshop, and every week, I'm going to be making the models that I'm working on available for members of the workshop so that they can download them, take a look at them, modify them as they see fit, copy and paste stuff to their own, their own models, just generally take a look at what I've been working on in their own 3D program. And all those models will be available for people who are in the program. I'm not going to be posting them publicly, just so that there's a little bit of added value for people who actually signed up and paid some money. But as I've mentioned before, that these streams will continue to be public, even if there is a delay in between me actually doing the stream and me posting it on YouTube. Additionally, I do have the video on demand stuff turned on for Twitch, so if you had to leave in the middle of this or something, you'll still be able to pick it up between the end of this stream and the next one. Though, honestly, I'm not super familiar with how too much of that works, so if it's broken, I guess you'll just have to wait for YouTube. So, are there any more questions from the chat now that I'm sort of getting this shoulder and chest area into kind of a workable situation? Is there anything that you guys are curious about, or any questions that I can answer? I'm only going to be on here for roughly 40 more minutes, and for most of those 40 minutes, unless there are any questions, I'm mostly just going to be modeling and tweaking what I have here, since I've sort of more or less given all the commentary that I think is super necessary for this specific example. Yeah, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to post them in the chat. Oh, well, there we go. There's another question. What is something specific that a rigger would yell at you for? I can give you a great example of that. So, something that a rigger would yell at me for. Let's select this forearm and his elbow and hide everything else. Okay, so here we have his super duper basic noodle arm thing. This whole thing is just a series of edge loops. They don't have any sort of weird cuts like his shoulder currently does, and this is fine. This is kind of peachy. It doesn't, I mean, aside from needing a little bit more detail in areas like this, by maybe either subdividing it a bit or just adjusting placement, this would deform fairly well. So if I wanted to, say, have his arm twist around a little bit, like, have his hand rotate to a different angle, it would be pretty easy to do. It'd twist around pretty easily. It'd be super simple to get that done in a rig, mainly because this is all very regular geometry. However, if this forearm has, say, not as many loops as the rest, when this rotates, and I'll go back to the regular model view so it's a little more visible. When this rotates around, things are going to start crumpling up and going inside of each other. So as you can see from this angle, there's just simply not enough detail there for it to support the shape of the model. So if I don't have very regular geometry, very regular topology, like I have right now, I could actually have a lot more in here as well. I could probably like double this up. Oops. There we go. This is probably a lot better, actually. If I didn't have this sort of regular geometry, that is absolutely something that a rigger would yell at me for. Something else they might yell at me for, not having enough geometry around the elbow. Once again, the elbow right here probably could use a few more loops, because what you're starting to see is these areas like right here, where the outside of the high poly model goes way beyond, and we're just not getting a nice round silhouette for this forearm. Now what that's going to do is make it so that when this arm is bending, the back is just going to turn into kind of a crunchy mess. So let's take a look at what that could look like. Let's just bend it real quick. Let's do this. So as this thing is bending, you can see that without enough geometry in there, it's it just starts to look like a crumpled mess. You can see all these polygon edges. It just is ugly as hell. And that's something that a rigger would yell at me at, because what's going to happen back here is, one, it looks ugly because the silhouette's all fucked up, but two, it's also going to start stretching textures and stuff. There's going to be intense stretching back here that is simply not going to be fixable, and a lot of things will start to become visible, like triangulation errors, seams in the textures, and if I handed this off to a rigger right now, they would tell me, put more loops around the elbow so that when it comes time to get feedback from the art director or someone, they're not the person who is catching hell for having the elbow be very low resolution, because that is potentially something that a rigger could run into, is an art director or someone else seeing that the back of the elbow just looks crunchy and gross and crumpled and thinking that it's their fault because of bad skinning or something, when in reality what it would actually be is my fault as the character artist. I didn't put enough detail there, it wasn't usable, and the rigger was working with what they had, but I didn't give them enough to work with. So sometimes I might double or triple the amount of detail in an elbow just to make sure that the rigger has enough to work with. Other areas that would present problems for a rigger are things like, let's see here. What is a good example? Oh, you know what? I have a perfect example of some things that a rigger might get angry at me for. So I have another version of this model that I was working on before. And let me just pull that up right now. So here's another version where I'm doing some similar stuff to what I had before. And, I've been trying to just generally outline some of the shapes of the muscles without worrying too much about deformation. The problem with only worrying about shapes and not with how things are going to deform, like that bendy straw example I gave before, is that you end up with lots of weird edge loops like this, where they spiral around to all sorts of different areas. I mean, it might look cool to have everything delineated like this. So like, here's like this is okay, this loop around the back of the elbow, because it adds some more density so that you don't get as much of that crunchy stuff like I was just talking about. But other things like this, where it goes around the bottom of the back, that doesn't really make any sense. There's this one which just spirals around all sorts of parts of the models, comes back and meets itself, separates, goes other places. I mean, this looks cool, and it might be suitable for a still or for sculpting, but if you are going to model out all this detail, you need to make sure that areas like, say, the knees do have consistent edge loops. Otherwise, when a rigger is going to go and paint weights and apply blend shapes and stuff, it's going to be very hard for them to select proper edge loops, because you end up having things like this. If they can't select edge loops very well, that means that they're not going to be able to do their jobs very well, because their jobs are so dependent upon selecting the right edge loops to start smoothing things out. So this one big edge loop right here, I mean, it looks cool and it's fun to model, but it's pretty much unusable, and it will make anyone on your rigging team cry. So we've got another question. Is topology and edge flow for AAA games usable for feature animation films? Sorry for the noob question. That is not a noob question. That's actually a very good question, and something that's good to bring up. Excuse me, sorry about that. In general, you will use the same type of topology for, say, a high poly model for a feature film that you would for a low poly in a current generation game where, say, you're making a 100,000 triangle character. So here's an example of where things are right, I have edge loops going around the lips and gums for this character, and they're laid out in such a way that they should, at least in theory, easily deform for things like blend shapes on the mouth right here, or maybe up here. I've got some very consistent loops going on around the eyes. These are going to be really easy for a rigger to add weighting and bones and blend shapes to, just because they're very regular and it's easy to see how they're laid out, and it's easy for you to just select one edge loop without it going completely crazy, like right here. This is insane. This is bad, and this will make people want to do bad things to you. If you have things that are very consistent, things that, if you have edge loops that keep the selections in very contained areas, like the edge loops going around his lips or his eyes, those are great. Those are usable for games, and if you just, say, converted this into subdivision surfaces like I've just done right now, these are things where they would deform nicely if you're using tessellation or if you're just using subdivision surfaces in a movie. Now, granted, this topology does subdivide cleanly, but it's much more suited for sculpting than it is for deformation. So, are there any other questions from the chat? I'm just going to be going back to the model that I was just working on and continuing to iterate on it over the next, say, half hour or so. So if you have any more questions or anything you're curious about, feel free to post them in the Twitch chat. Otherwise, I'm just going to be continuing to sort of noodle around with the geometry on this guy. Let's see, we've got another one. It's are there any other tools for retopology that I would recommend other than Modo? Sure, yeah, there are lots of good retopology tools out there. I use Modo just because I like the way that it works, and I've been using it for quite a long time. So it's familiar to me, and it's just, you know, it sort of fits the way that I like to work. But there are plenty of other tools out there that are great for retopology. For example, Topogun. Topogun is a very widely used program that does exactly what it says on the tin. It makes topology, and it's really good at it. It's fast, it's fairly stable, it can handle high polygon counts, and it's used in production all the time. Lots of people at work, lots of people at like Insomniac use it, lots of people at other companies use it. It's very consistent and easy to use. It has a good interface, and yeah, I would recommend it. You know, there are other tools out there, like I've heard very good things, though I haven't used it for this. I've heard very good things about the retopology tools in oh, I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the name. Well, I've heard good things about the newer tools in Maya and like the graphite modeling tools in 3D Studio Max. Yeah, there's lots of tools out there. Yes, Topogun is, yeah, it's good for, well, retopologizing. That's sort of what it's built for, is retopology. So it's going to be a good choice if you want to retopologize models. Let's see here. We've got a weird sort of thing going on here. Let's simplify this a little bit. Let's do that. Yes, 3D coat. That's what I was trying to think of, and I couldn't for whatever reason. I have heard good things about 3D coats retopology tools, though I personally haven't used them. I know lots of people who do use them, and they have essentially nothing but good things to say. So if you want to check that out, I suppose I would suggest it, even though I haven't had the pleasure of using them. So let's add another loop right here. We can continue to build off of this. Another question that I've got is, will I be covering techniques for retopoing clothing folds? Yes, during probably the last week of this workshop, I will be talking a lot about clothing, hard surface models, specifically for characters, so say like accessories, that type of thing, and a bit about clothing. I'm not going to be getting into clothing too much because it is sort of its own large topic. Which is a little bit beyond the scope of just a single month-long course. Um, but I will be at least touching on it. I'll probably be covering some of the very basics of it because it's such a large topic. And what I'll probably be doing mostly is talking about transferring stuff from, say, Marvelous Designer into ZBrush or other programs, making things a little easier for yourself if you want to start sculpting clothes. So once again, we've got a couple of weird edges right here, a couple of weird loops, and I'm just trying to connect them to other more consistent loops that we have in ways that sort of make sense. Now I'm happy with this loop that I have right here because it very consistently goes along the shape of the arm, but there's some stuff that I'm also not super happy with. For example, this loop right here, it goes across the back and then up into the neck. I might want to terminate that in a slightly different way. I can do that partially by lowering the detail for that loop, and so just collapsing some edges, and then start rebuilding this area right here where the arm connects to the upper chest. So let's see, there's another question. Well, when using clothes from Marvelous Designer, would you usually retopo from scratch or use the topology from Marvelous Designer as a base? I personally do not use the topology from Marvelous Designer unless it's for something very regular, like a rectangular piece of fabric over which I can draw a very regular topology. The main reason for that is that, at least currently, Marvelous Designer's topology that it exports, especially when you do quads, it just simply isn't very usable for too much. It's irregular, it has a combination of quads and triangles, it's just generally kind of ugly and hard to work with. So in general, what I'll do is I'll just export the triangled version of the export from Marvelous Designer, and then from there start doing stuff in, say, ZBrush, or do some very basic retopology in, say, Modo or something like that. In this area, along his shoulders, is providing some challenges, so let's see what I can do to alleviate that a little bit. So this loop, this loop right here seems to be the main culprit, the main problem. So let's get rid of some of that. Let's select this. Yeah, we can get rid of that too. Now let's select this and see where it goes and what it connects to. Okay, so I want this to be one complete contiguous loop. One way that I can achieve that is by welding these together. Now it is going to have some ugly consequences right here, but that I can fix by doing this and removing that triangle, sliding this up a little bit, deleting that, and connecting this. So we have a complete loop and another complete loop. Sweet. Now all I have to do is fill in this gap right here, which should, in theory, be fairly easy. So let's start trying to do that. Let's have this loop connect with this one. So one of the features that I like in Modo, which is present in some form in a lot of other programs, is the ability to connect things together very easily with the bridge tool so that they follow the contours of the model like that. So we're going to do that right now. Just bridge these. There we go. That's cool. Okay, so what do we got? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's an odd number. I don't like that. Let's just make it match. All right. Let's do this. This. And this. This. All right, now I have one consistent loop going along right there. And what I can do is I can move this up into a more advantageous position for myself. And then add more detail through here. Sweet. Let's just smooth this out a bit. Well, if it will actually behave. Yeah, I guess not. That's fine. Another question I'm getting from the chat is, does this workshop repeat every month, just with a different topic? That sort of depends. The last workshop that I did was focused strictly on materials, because that seems to be something that a lot of people were interested in, that a lot of people needed some help with, and something that I could provide some help with. This one is more focused on modeling simply because I saw a lot of people struggling with things like retopology, modeling clothing, getting effective topology for things like faces, especially people who are sort of new to 3D modeling or people who are trying to break into the industry. I figured it'd probably be helpful. And that's generally what I'm going to be trying to do with each workshop whenever I run one, is try to figure out what a lot of people will find useful at the time and put out content that's related to it. A lot of it's related to discussions that I have online through, say, Twitter or Facebook. So I try to be fairly reactive in that way and bring out information that I have that'll be useful to people in the moment. I don't actually know what the next workshop will be about, but hopefully, well, it'll be something fairly relatable that a lot of people will be able to benefit from. Let's see here. We'll just smooth these out a little bit. Okay. This is looking pretty all right now. And as a bonus, we've got this loop coming up here, which we'll be able to connect, maybe even by going up and across. That might be a little more advantageous to have that than going across the middle of the back, because what it's going to do is, if I have this going up along the top, it's going to add a little bit more geometry up top, so that when this guy lowers his arms, there will be some more stretch up there for him. So what I can do is have this, let's see here, let's loop this around. Let's disconnect it from what's down here. Yeah, by deleting that. And then let's just make a little avenue to continue that loop up through here. So one question is, are you avoiding triangles unless absolutely necessary? Everything's quads right now. Right now, I'm not specifically avoiding triangles. I just don't particularly have any use for them right now. However, if I do want to start adding more detail to this guy, for example, if I want to subdivide him again and get much more smooth shapes, there are a few areas where I will start using triangles to define shapes a little better, and add a little bit of detail in areas that otherwise don't have much detail. So for example, if I wanted to define this muscle group right here on the back of his shoulder blade, right there, I might actually have a big triangle in the middle of that, which when I subdivide it will look pretty good. So if I do this, let's just connect these real quick. I can show you. I'll just do this for now. When I subdivide that, actually let's do that triangle even bigger. Let's do we'll do it this way. We'll make it nice and chunky. Let's see. Move this loop just for now. Delete that and make one large triangle. Let's see, what's the best placement for it? Probably going to have the tip right there. That right there. Yeah, that's going to be good. Okay, let's do it that way. 1 second while I figure this out, the best way to do this. Okay, so I got that big triangle right there. What this is going to do is it's going to subdivide into quads again, and those quads are going to allow me to get the shape of that muscle group. So I could actually subdivide that a few times, or I could just draw a big triangle right in the middle of here, and that's acting kind of funky, but let's just do this. What you doing, Polygon? There we go. So we're gonna define this muscle group right here. Let's get this up here like that. So I can subdivide that like so. Pull the ends out even more. Subdivide it again. And this is going to help me to define that muscle right there. So if I come back here to the regular model view, And there, you can see that I defined that pretty nicely, and it all started as a triangle. And then I could start connecting these edges to, you know, down here and such. The main reason that I'm not using triangles right now is just I don't really have a huge use for them at the moment. And adding definition in an area like that, kind of like I did with this one, or rather this one, just doesn't really add anything super useful. But there are areas like maybe in here, or you know, like this right here. This used to be a triangle before it was subdivided. That's useful for defining shapes, but not so much for getting really usable topology. So right now, mainly what I'm concerned with is laying out usable topology that's going to give me nice continuous loops that make things easy for whoever is going to rig this. And in that case, the person who's going to rig this is somebody who I work with, and she'll be very, very angry at me if I make something that's garbage. So, yeah. Let's see here. Got some more questions, one of which is, will you be retopologizing a human head or this character's head? I'm actually going to be doing both, and there are a few reasons for that. Chief among them is that it's important to see how you can use the same techniques for different types of heads. So, for example, laying out edge loops like I did on, let's see here, on this guy, so that he's got loops around his eyes and around his mouth. That's something that you would use on basically any character that has eyes and a mouth, and I'm going to be using that on some heads. So, like for this guy, let's see here. So this is a free downloadable head that you can get. It's from a company called Infinite Realities. You'll probably see this a lot when people are trying to do skin shading tests and stuff. And one of the things that I'm doing with it, just for this quick example, is laying out some very, very basic topology, which I can then use the same sort of subdivision tricks and such to get better, cleaner stuff. I'm going to be retopologizing this head along with another head, and for both of those human heads, I'm going to be using the same topology. I'm actually going to retopologize this head since it has slightly more generic features, and then copy and paste the retopology over to the other head, which has a lot more unique and asymmetrical features, and I'll be deforming things so that they both fit onto the same topology, even though they're different heads. I'm also going to be using the same UVs for both heads, even though they're drastically different from each other, just by way of demonstration. I've got one more question, and this is probably going to be the last question that I get into before I head into the private hangout with the program members, or the workshop members. That's which has been the more complex model that you... Oh, what's the most complex model that I've ever retopologized? That's a good question. There are a few models that I've been working on for Spider-Man PS4 right now that have been extremely complex, but that's literally all that I can say about that. I can't tell, I can't tell anybody what exactly I've been working on simply because it's under NDA, and yeah, it's important to keep it secret. But there are some pretty complex models that I've been working on. There were some models for Ratchet and Clank that were pretty complex, but each model offers its own set of complexities and potential problems, especially since each model that you work on, unless it's something very basic, is going to be pretty much unique. All right, and I think with that, I'm going to start wrapping things up here. Thank you guys for coming and watching. It means a ton to me to see that even the current, 16 people are watching. I think that's great. It means that at least some people are going to benefit from this, if not everybody. And it means that I'm going to continue doing this stuff because I like helping people. Even if it's not helpful for one person, it might be helpful for another, and that's really all that matters to me. Once again, I'd like to emphasize that I'm going to keep the public parts of these streams free. But if you sign up for the workshop, you're going to get an additional hour of sort of group discussion and stuff live through a Google Hangout, and that will continue throughout the next month, the next 7 sessions. I will be I will be uploading all of the recorded videos of these sessions to YouTube, and I'll be posting announcements for that on Twitter and such. And if you like this stuff, just tell me. Just send me a message on Twitter. If you know me on Facebook or something, send me a message on there. Just say, hey, this is cool. And if there's something specific that you'd like me to cover, sure, I can toss it in. And if I can't toss it into this one, since this one's mostly modeling focused, maybe I'll toss it into another one later on. And with that, once again, thank you so much. I'm going to be heading off to the private Google Hangout and talking with some of the program members. I still have some spots open if this seems like something you guys want to sign up for. I will see you guys on Thursday night at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for another session of modeling where I'm going to be finishing off a lot more of the retopology for this guy. I'm going to be doing a little bit, behind the scenes for that sort of Food Network magic where they pull out a finished dish, but it's not going to be 100% complete. I'm going to be doing a lot more work on this on the stream and explaining as I go. And I'm also going to be explaining the reasons that I make certain decisions while I'm modeling. Next week, I'm going to be talking about facial topology and general head topology and how I could take a head like, for example, this one that I'm working on, and just chunk it onto the model that I was just working on. I'm going to talk about joining this head to that body. I'm going to talk about joining this head to other bodies. Different solutions for topology for that. Different solutions for using subdivision or low poly models for that. And I'm going to be talking about what goes into making a face that should deform properly with things like facial motion capture / performance capture, blend shapes, bones, that type of thing. And I'm going to be talking about the different topology that you can use for faces, even if you're not going to be using things like, facial capture or something. So hopefully you guys tune in for that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I certainly have I had a lot of fun tonight, and I'm looking forward to it. So with that, it is now 9 p.m., and I will see you guys later. Have a good night, and I will see the program members in the private hangout. Good night, guys.